What's up, guys? Ryan Von Adler back here with another episode of Tone Clones for you guys, the series where I try and recreate famous and iconic guitar tones using nothing but the gear that I have in my collection in my Kemper profiler, which is right below my desk right here. Today's episode, we're going to be trying to sound like Tony Iommi of the legendary Black Sabbath. Tony Iommi, godfather of heavy metal, the master of down tuning, and I think the reason that at least a couple of you guys, myself included, picked up guitar. So, talking about Tony Iommi and like his rig and everything like that, you'd be hard pressed to be able to mention it without bringing up the Gibson SG and Laney amplifiers. Now, originally when Sabbath first started, he was using Marshall Plexis, but when he went to Marshall to try and get an endorsement from them, try and get some free gear, they said no. Laney was the only company that would actually give him free gear, and he's been with them ever since. So I think it's kind of cool to see that he's stuck with that, especially in an industry where people are kind of trading and bouncing back and forth between companies left and right. Now, also, the SG, one of the ones that he's really famously known for using, his old boy, the one that looks really battle worn and like it's been set on fire, that one originally isn't actually a Gibson. It's made by a luthier down in Australia, I believe, who also made one of Angus Young's most iconic SGs that he was using back in the Back in Black era. He's probably still using it. But the reason the paint job looks so like destroyed was he had the guitar commissioned and it didn't have a chance to finish, like the paint didn't finish curing, didn't finish drying before he needed it to go on tour with Sabbath. So it hadn't fully set up, and that's why it looks all destroyed and stuff like that. So I just thought it was kind of a fun thing that it added character, made the guitar even more recognizable, and it was a mistake. But shows sometimes that happy accidents happen. We, unfortunately, don't have an SG right now. I have a husk of one, but it's sitting in storage. I haven't had a chance to actually put it all together. So the closest thing that I have is this Tokai Love Rocks special right here. I've got a Spaceballs sticker on it because Spaceballs is life. But like I said, this is the closest thing I have. Now the reason we're using this is because it has our P90 pickups, which Iommi is famous for using. This one, pretty much stock except for a Seymour Duncan Antiquity P90 here in the bridge. Other than that, you can think about it as being just like your normal Les Paul or SG construction. We have a mahogany body. Into that, we're going just a mahogany neck, rosewood fretboard. Everything else, like I said, is completely stock. But this guitar, a really fun thing to play around with. If you ever see one, definitely give the Tokais a shot. You don't see a ton of them. Pick this up off of a friend and I absolutely love it because it's a fun guitar. And it's one that, it's not thousands of dollars, so you don't have to feel precious with it. But after that, we're running into our Kemper profiler. Now keep in mind, these profiles are all included on your profiler when you buy it. So if you guys have a Kemper, you can automatically make this tone. Everything else, it's already in the box. There's no added plugins or packs you have to buy. Let's go ahead and hop into the rig manager and I'll show you guys exactly what we're using to create this tone. I said he's famous for using Laney, so obviously the first place we're going to start is with a Laney profile on here. Now this one, like I said, comes standard with your profiler. It's by Lars Lutka, and it's the Lan I Ironic. It's a Laney Ironheart. Did a little bit of tweaking. Now that you'll see, there's not a ton of effects or anything going on here. Most of the things that I do, I try and keep it pretty bare bones, kind of get you the rough profile, and if you want to add on your delays, your reverbs, any of the other funky things like a phaser, feel free to add that on. This will kind of get you that bass platform. If you just want to play some Black Sabbath riffs, whether it's for YouTube or just for your own fun, or if you're in a cover or tribute band or something like that, you've got a place to start. So let's go ahead and start with the amp. Now here, the first thing that I want to notice is the EQ is pretty much a 12 o'clock. I've got a little bit of a dip on the bass, and I'll kind of get into why I have that later, mostly because of the fuzz. But we have this little fun thing here. So the amp model, if you guys aren't familiar with this, Kemper just released the liquid profiling here about 2 weeks ago. So if you aren't part of the public beta, go on the website, sign up for it so you get access to some of the new features they've added in here. Now this one, normally it just says Kemper generic if you do have it downloaded, but you can actually go through and play around with it and you've got a bunch of different options. So these are going to give you control over the tone stack, over the gain stack, and all those sorts of things to make your Kemper a little bit more versatile, kind of like if you're using like a modeler amp or something like that. So you've got all these different things from Fenders down to Oranges, Soldanos. Now I'm using the Marshall Plexi Brit. I'm not quite sure what the difference between the BRT and the normal are here, but actually it's probably Bright. As I say that, it makes sense. But so we're using the Bright here. Now with that, I added that and then tweaked the EQ. But the thing where it gets really interesting is down here. So the definition, I actually turned that up a little bit, so I'm not sure exactly what that does to the tone, how it works, but it just made it sound a little bit closer. And then we have power sagging. So power sag, if you guys have ever used a tube amp, basically what happens is if you hit a really loud guitar chord, a lot of attack, and you don't have a really powerful transformer in there, the transformer can actually take a second to catch up to the sound that you're making. It's actually struggling a little bit to get back to that, the voltage or the wattage. I'm not an electrician, so that stuff still doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but it kind of affects the way that the attack and the compression affects the amp. So I wanted to adjust that. We actually cranked it up to 4.1, which is the highest that I ever really go, or that I've ever gone on any of these profiles. But once I got up on the power sag and actually made it sound a little more vintage, a little bit more just kind of spongy and kind of like what his tones were like. Now, for this profile, I was using, or rather for this episode of Tone Clones, I was using the guitar tracks for the song Sweet Leaf by Black Sabbath. I was having a hard time finding just the guitar stems for a ton of Sabbath songs. So Sweet Leaf was the best quality one that I found, so I figured it was the easiest one to kind of try and achieve, like I said, that baseline tone. Definitely recommend going to check that out. Search on YouTube, just Sweet Leaf guitar stems, so you can see the comparison. But after that, after the amp, let's go ahead and start on the pedal board. So I've got a noise gate. Since we're using P90s, want to always make sure you have one of these. Even if you're using humbuckers, it's always a great idea just to try and quiet that signal before it goes into the amp so you're not getting unwanted noise. But specifically with P90s, because there is that 60 cycle hum, I've got this cranked up pretty high to try and counteract some of that. Next, moving on to a Kemper fuzz. Now, Iommi uses fuzz, but he wasn't using them all the time. Now, this was kind of one that I had to play around with because originally I was thinking, oh, I'll just throw a treble booster in it, which I still have, but that wasn't quite getting me there. It didn't have the same saturation, didn't have the same kind of characteristics. And I think part of that is because of the other gear that was added on afterwards. So if you think about when you're recording a guitar tone, you have, the guitar amp and the speaker cab, and then you have that mic'd up. That mic is running into preamps, it's running into the board. Everything along that way is adding extra saturation, extra clipping on there. So you're getting a little bit of characteristic, a little bit of color added to that tone. So that's what I'm kind of using this fuzz to replicate. It just kind of helped get a little bit more of that like creaminess and that growliness going on. So with this, I started with the Kemper fuzz. We're starting with the creamy setting, and then I just kind of tweaked a little bit. So adding a little extra drive, and then I actually brought the mix down to about 88%. Now that was because I didn't want it to sound like we're running a fuzz into the amp. I just wanted a little bit of that characteristic to add, like I said, that kind of sponginess. It's the best way I can describe it. I probably said sponginess way too many times in this episode. Moving out of the Kemper fuzz, we have the treble booster. Iommi really famously known for using treble boosters to add a little bit more top end, which is also really interesting considering he plays light strings. It seems like it would sound kind of tinny, but somehow it really works for him. So I've got the tone at about 4.2, everything else just exactly as it comes. And then the next thing we're moving on to the Studio EQ. Now we're not doing any big moves on this. I only have 3 adjustments, so I've got a little bit of a boost here at 100 Hertz, a little bit of a boost at 520 Hertz, and then I've got a little bit of a reduction here at 1.5 kilohertz. Other than that, I think I adjusted the high cut just so we didn't get too much fizz on there, so I've got that rolling off right about 12.5K, like I said, so you don't get too much fizziness and that kind of weird twang. Sometimes when you're using Kemper profilers or any like modeling amplifier or like plugins, there's gonna be a little more high-end information than you would normally capture if you were to record a proper guitar tone. So sometimes rolling off that high-end shelf will help you get a little bit more of an authentic sound. Same thing with rolling off the low cut, just to help it sound a little more like a real amp. So after that, I've got another noise gate, just another 4:1 ratio here. This one's set a little bit lower at the very end. Again, just trying to calm a little bit more of that kind of buzz, that hiss that you get with P90s. It's always important to have one at the beginning just so you don't introduce any extra noise into your distortion because that'll make it even worse. It'll amplify it, especially if you have like a compressor. And then I like to have one at the end too, just to make sure that if there's any artifacts created by the gain in the amp profile, those are kind of taken out as well. And to be fair, if I was recording this, I'd probably throw on another noise suppressor in Logic just to have a little bit more control over there, but I wouldn't want to print that on just in case that were to, say, affect my transients or any sort of sustain that I was trying to capture. So definitely play around with that. And as always, with any of these things, if you're trying to replicate this guitar tone at home, I fully encourage you to play around with the gain, play around with the amp settings and the EQ and stuff like that, because this gets you a basic platform, but all of these are engineered for the guitar that I'm playing it through. So if, for example, I picked up any of the other guitars on my shelf, like if I picked up my Jim Root Telecaster, or if I picked up my Explorer right over there, that's going to make a little bit of a difference because they're different pickups, the sounds are different. Every guitar has its own tone profile. So you want to play around with it and just make sure it sounds good to your ears, and then, you're all good from there. After that, that's pretty much everything that we have in here. The other thing that I did want to mention a little bit is the cabinet. Now, I think a lot of people kind of completely ignore this. For example, if you right click on it, you can actually do a cab preset. So these will give you just different speaker, I guess simulations is a good way to look at it. So you've got a bunch of Celestians here, the G12s, you've got a Creamback, which is an amazing underrated speaker. Then you got a Blue, which is like an Alnico Blue, kind of the things they put in box amps and stuff like that. So play around with those, but I kept it stock and I actually just adjusted the character. So normally this is going to be right at 12. So I bumped that down to 9 o'clock. It seems to give it just a little more of a vintage. I think it makes the speaker sound like it's a little bit more worn in. And obviously when you're touring, you're not using new stuff every time. So I think a lot of the gear that he was using probably had some high mileage on it. And when you're using speakers after a while, they do start to, they kind of settle in. They kind of lose some of their magnetic pull and stuff like that. So an old speaker is going to sound a little bit different than a brand new speaker, even if it's the exact same speaker from the same production date and all that kind of stuff. So play around with that. And like I said, feel free to try any of the different cab presets. I did actually really like the G1265 for, I don't remember if I was using the SM57 or the TLM 107, but for this amp, it didn't quite fit the tone that I was going for. It didn't get me closer to Tony Iommi's tone, but it was kind of a fun thing to play around with. So if you guys are ever using your Kemper and just, you know, messing around with your own stuff, give those a shot. So guys, that's going to go ahead and conclude it for this episode of Tone Clones Tony Iommi edition. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't hesitate to hit that like button to let me know. Subscribe if you want to see more. Little sneak peek, I do have another Ozzy Osbourne guitarist, I'm not going to mention by name, but you probably know, coming here soon that we're going to be tackling, trying to get some more guitar tones out. So if you want to see that, hit that notification bell so that you are notified as soon as that video drops. And let me know in the comments section how you guys think I did as far as trying to recreate this tone. And if there's anybody else you want to see me recreate. I've gotten some really great feedback from you guys, a couple other people that I've added to my list that I hadn't thought about. So those should be coming soon. But that's going to do it for today. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.